Welcome back to Following Know It on a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 126, and we are finishing part 4 of Rhythm of War. Paul, how are you?
Excellent. I'm excited to finish part 4 and get into our final part of Rhythm of War. I don't think I ever thought we would actually get here.
It is kind of, I know we've said it before, but it's kind of strange to finally get to this section of the podcast. Elliot, how are you?
Doing well, doing very well. I'm feeling the same things. I remember at us recording this podcast, I think we were in like end of Way of Kings when Rhythm of War came out.
Yep.
And you went dark off the internet for 4 days as you read the book straight, like cover to cover. And I just remember like thinking, oh man, we're never gonna get there. That's gonna be forever. And then here we are headed into part 5 of Rhythm of War as a podcast.
Yeah. We have a very memorable scene to cover this week. I remembered it vividly from my first read. There's some things I completely forgot, and then some things I definitely remember, and we have both of those in today's chapter. Do you guys have 2 words to summarize this episode? Paul.
Yeah, my 2 words for this episode are progression. I almost knocked my cup over. My 2 words for this episode are progression and destruction.
Okay. Elliot?
As usual, I think we may touch on some similar stuff. My 2 words are detached and canceled.
All right. Let's use these 4 words and talk about Rhythm of War. All right, Paul, you can go ahead and go first.
All right. So progression is, I'm using the fancy schmancy term for our regrowth surge, which is the literal term. It's not anything fancier. And I did that kind of as a symbolism or to point towards Maya, who we see in here, and some progression or healing that we've seen there. As well as, like, if you look at the word literally, how we know it, like we are progressing through a lot of storylines right now, and a lot is moving forward. So that was why I chose progression. Destruction is because silver progression means that we are finding things that are really good at destruction, or I think might be really good at destruction, like our anti-void light or whatever we want to call it. I have an inkling that it might be really good at destruction. So that was my 2 words.
Elliot?
My first one was detached, which I picked specifically for the scene with Vale and how Vale detaches from Shallan in this crazy, crazy scene. I really am looking forward to like diving into this with you guys because I have thoughts and so many questions about this detachment. But then I was thinking about kind of attachments as well, both with Adolin and Maya, and something kind of building there, and we see a bit of a payoff of that. And then, of course, with Navani and her light experiments and the various different attaching and detaching and combining and exploding and fun stuff she's getting into. And then I also picked canceled. And I picked this one specifically for some of the sciencey bits that we get in the Navani chapter with the sound waves canceling each other out.
Yeah.
Which answered, it dove into the question that's been on my engineering brain for a while now, which was how do you come up with the opposite of a sound, a tone? And they kind of got into it. I was left a little bit wanting. I'm not sure it quite answered all of my questions, but again, I'm excited to talk about it with you guys. So those are my 2 words.
Sounds good. Paul, do you have a mug?
I do have a cup for us this week. So I'm excited to say to announce our newest surgeon on the block, being Mr. Daniel, if you can read my horrible handwriting. I honestly would like to take a brief moment to apologize because I have been the one to put the names on the mugs, and my handwriting, I would wager, is the worst out of the three of us, even though I don't know how Trevor and Elliot's handwriting is.
Mine is
But,
worse than
my-
yours, I promise.
Mine is okay. This is my very best. This is me sitting there crafting, working my hardest to make it presentable. And it's always, I always feel insecure about it. So I'm so sorry. But we're very thankful for Daniel's support and all of the support of our viewers and our the people who support us as patrons. It helps us a lot, and so very excited. Thank you so much, Daniel, for your service as a surgeon.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment on your handwriting thing. My brain works faster than my wrist when I write, so I get bored with like words I'm writing and stop and start writing the next word as I'm still writing the same word. So I will skip letters and push words together when I'm writing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if other people do that or if that is just unique to me. But
I can relate.
It's
like your hand can only go so fast,
Correct.
But you know what you're writing.
And my brain is already to the next like 3 words, and so I've skipped a couple words anyway. Okay. Back to Eliot, what you were mentioning with your words right off the bat. Chapter 93. This is a chapter, and I mentioned this to our patrons in our Discord channel.
This is a chapter.
Yes.
That is true.
I had no memory of this chapter. The next chapter I had very vivid memory of with Maya, but this chapter I completely forgot about. I will be honest. I don't know if I slept through it or what when I was listening, but this was a very pleasant surprise when I assigned these chapters. I don't really look at the summaries anymore. I used to do that back in like early Rhythm of War and the 3 books previous. I would look at the wiki summaries of the chapters to kind of refresh my brain so I could, do like little character arc episodes and finish at good stopping points. I no longer do that because I basically don't really know the material anymore. So I just go by page count when I'm doing chapter splits at this point. So when I read this chapter, I was like, wow, this is a really, really powerful scene. How do I not remember this at all? So what did you guys get out of this chapter?
Well, I think this whole like kind of series of events and things were some of my favorite parts. We'll get more into it in chapter 94, what was probably my favorite, but the Shallan things were really good too. And we get a lot of like reveals of some things that we have suspected that maybe this first off, we get dialogue from Formless, which I think is really like I was really curious to see what would happen.
Yeah.
And I'm honestly curious to ask Elliot what he thought. Because I feel like I've had conflicting feelings with all of the Shallan characters and things like that. And Formless is like the final boss of them, and there's a lot. But I'll probably let him, Elliot, take it away to kind of introduce that more. I'm assuming. I'm putting a lot on you. I don't know if you wanted that, but
I'll totally take it. I'm with you on the Formless final boss thing. That's a good analogy. I think it was one of the previous chapters, if not the one right before this, one of the recent ones, where we first saw like Formless spoke, Formless said, and then there was the words, and that scared the crap out of me. Was oh crap, Shallan is gone. We're never going to see her again. This is the end. I think after this chapter, I'm feeling way more positive than I was when I first saw, oh no, Formless is here. I thought this chapter with Shallan was phenomenal.
I agree.
I think I think it's my second favorite Shallan moment ever in all the books.
Behind the girl who stood up.
No.
Oh.
That would probably be top 5. I think my first favorite, and I'd have to go back and dig it up to find the quote, is in Kholinar, Wit Hoyd finds Shallan and has this awesome pull her out of the mud moment.
That's the girl who
That's
stood
my
up.
favorite too.
That is okay.
Yes.
I guess
that's the girl who stood up.
I was
okay.
also.
Thank you. I thought you were referring to the one that the image one in your Thiru when
that
she
is the girl who looked up, and
There
then
we go.
and then it circles back.
Yeah.
And
Come on, Elliot.
What am I doing?
Yes.
No, I was with you there, Elliot. In that is my favorite scene, and I also did not think that was the girl who stood up. Oh,
We should know this by now. But yes, that is my favorite Shallan moment. Incredibly powerful. This felt equally powerful. Maybe not quite in as epic or showy as a way, but that moment where Vale separates from Shallan, and then Shallan and Vale have, or Formless and Vale, I suppose, here have this conversation, and then it ends with this. I almost got emotional. This farewell of Vale. Vale's like, I've done everything I can for you. I'm out, and then just fades away. Is like, oh, is Vale gone?
That's what I was wondering.
Gone?
Yeah, it seemed really final. Of Vale saying, "Did I do a good job? Did I help? Did I protect you well?" And Shallan says yes, and then Vale vanishes like any other illusion. Is how the book says it. So,
and I'll pass it back to you, Paul, here in just a second. But I think it's really telling of how far we've come and how well written this is. That we didn't like Vale to start with.
right.
We talked a lot on this podcast, not necessarily recently, but quite a bit at multiple times, how we didn't really identify with Shallan's struggle and how it was not our favorite storyline to work with. And sometimes even we talked about how we were a bit begrudging as we, flipped over a chapter. Going to be Shallan and Vale arguing again. Here we go. And yet here we are at this pivotal moment in her personality crisis, and I'm getting choked up because Vale might be gone. I hadn't even realized it till I read it that I'm actually attached to Vale. I don't like Vale. I didn't like Vale. I don't think I still don't like Vale. But I'm getting choked up here because she's about to be gone. What is this?
yeah. So I feel like I have too many thoughts on this. So for one, yes, we've talked about on this podcast before. We've talked about how Shallan, especially from the point of kind of all of these different different persons with Shallan, how it was it was a little bit difficult to track at times. There's a lot of things that go into it, But if I had to pick a not Shallan character, Shallan is my favorite. Actual Shallan, I like Shallan. With between Vale and Radiant, I've always liked Vale way more, and I feel like Vale came about from a more practical standpoint of it was I need to be undercover, sneaky,
Right.
brash, street smart, And Radiant, on the other hand, I've never liked Radiant, and I think now I'm thinking about it more, I think it may have been a lot of because I feel like Radiant came up because of insecurities in Shallan, not necessarily from a practical standpoint of I need to do this, but Radiant was the one who was well spoken and forthright and strong and stuff like that, where Shallan didn't believe she could be. And I think maybe that's why, because I was like, no, Shallan, you can do this. And so it was almost more frustration tied in with Radiant. But Vale, I don't think I had those feelings associated. And so, at least that's what I'm thinking. I liked Vale more maybe. But you have a good point, Elliot, in that this did I didn't expect Veil to like dissipate here or anything. And
So while we're talking about Radiant and versus Veil, I always thought that it made more sense from a character standpoint if Radiant would actually emerge before Veil. If you remember back to Words of Radiance, Shallan kills Tin and kind of absorbs a lot of Tin's training into Veil. But before she really finishes that process, she has to confront the High Court of the High Princes, and she has to like compose herself as Shallan and be well outspoken as a lady of Yakavet or whatever. And then it's not till Oathbringer that we get, oh, Adolin needs me to be this scholar, warrior, like regal person. That's not Shallan. I'm going to create Radiant. But I always had an issue with that because I was back in Words of Radiance. Shallan showed that she was capable of that, and she was capable of politics and courting Adolin. Like she did all of that as Shallan, and then suddenly in Oathbringer you have to invent a new persona to do what you were already doing. I thought Radiant should come earlier than Veil, but that's a whole nother conversation.
yeah, I can see the ways that Radiant has been used, specifically like that Radiant has killed someone and quote Shallan hasn't,
Right.
and that's honestly like I feel like the only thing that I could really point to with this point, because I've like I don't think it's unknown on the podcast. I have not been a fan of Radiant for the reasons that you're mentioning, Trevor. I feel like Shallan can do these things, and we've seen a lot of reasons why she struggles to do these things, but we have seen her do them, and so
Right.
I kind of was really hoping for like a personal growth, like the girl who stood up. I loved that scene. I loved it so much, and I was really hoping for like a change within Shallan, and there were changes, and there are things that have shifted. But I miss Shallan. I just kind of I've been annoyed, I guess, a bit with Radiant, like the purpose for Radiant and things like that. So
I think of Radiant as the contributor towards the war effort. Radiant is the fall in line soldier side of Shallan, whereas yes, Shallan can hold herself in court and can handle the politics, but Shallan's a little too spunky and a little too rebellious. Radiant is the much more calm, settled, can take orders like that. That's Radiant's job, is to take orders and execute them.
Yeah, that's true. So we get several reveals in this chapter, and I guess we can pluck them apart. One, Radiant killed Ela, confesses to killing Ela. That was a question we had at the beginning of this book of how did Ela die right in front of us? And yeah, apparently it was Radiant knew that Shallan was considering killing her, and as they walked out of the room, she just did it before Shallan could, to protect her. And then we get a couple reveals about Shallan's other cryptic. She did indeed bond a cryptic before Pattern that we find out in this chapter. We'd guessed that a couple episodes ago, and that is indeed what happened. She bonds a cryptic. Do you guys remember? I won't fish for it. I'll just give it to you. There's a line that says, "The cryptic came to her at a time when great darkness was spreading in her family." Do you guys remember that line?
Yeah, I think so.
Did you
vaguely.
guys get anything out of that line, or is that just is that just referring to her mom and her dad being terrible people?
I mean, I associated it with the things that we've seen in Words of Radiance, like the flashback scenes. I've always wondered that we always saw this like there was some shining thing in a box or behind a door or something like that, which we've had lots. I've thrown out a lot of things about that. Is it a dawn shard? Is it pattern or whoever? And my thought is maybe that's that cryptic in some
Right.
capacity, but I don't know. I've assumed it was tied to that.
Yeah, I didn't immediately associate anything additional to that other than, yeah, her father was not a great person and her mother also potentially not a great person, although we don't know a whole lot there.
Right. So Shallan confesses to herself in this chapter that she killed her mother accidentally, or as soon as she did it, she wished she hadn't, and she wished she'd been the one to die. Like, as a 7, 8-year-old, I don't remember how old she is at this time, but she kills her mother, and then I think later that day debonds her spren, says, "I don't want you anymore. You're nothing. You never were anything," and that's how she kills her original spren. And so going back to your light in a box thing, Paul, I'm fairly certain when she does that, she's killing her spren so it becomes a normal shard blade at like, this is recreant style. I'm debonding my spren. It becomes a normal shard blade.
Oh yeah.
And her father keeps the shard blade in a box, and it's like glowing. That is my interpretation of that. I don't know if that is spelled out or if that is accurate, but that is my guess.
I could see that. Yeah. We've had a lot of shard blades dance around Shallan's storyline, which is kind of funny, I think.
Yeah.
And that would make more sense because I was like, we've got like 2 spren and a shard blade and like, all in her childhood.
That actually brings up some interesting questions, though. We shouldn't derail too much because we have a lot to cover here. But if that is true, that Shallan's killing of her original spren did create I'll say traditional shard blade because that was the first shard blades we ever saw. That makes some of those scenes a little weird if you think back to her family. I would see that playing as her father would know exactly what a shard blade is and would use it to attain some power or self-defense or something. I think back to when, Helloran shows up and draws a shard blade. Everyone's like, whoa. Would that have been the reaction if he had a shard blade in his closet that he had access to? Like,
And then pull the string a little further. What shard blade is she using in Words of Radiance?
Well, pattern, right?
That's pattern.
It's not pattern. Her third ideal is not till the end of Words of Radiance.
But didn't we have a distinction that like aren't there Lightweavers on a different set of rules than with shard blades and things like that and ideals than are like Windrunners?
We made that assumption because we assumed that Shallan had her shard blade before her third ideal. Right?
Yes.
Because we knew that Shallan had her shard blade when she was young, but she's just now swearing her third ideal. So what are her rules? We don't know. I'm wondering, and this is a genuine question, did she kill Tin with with Shardblade 1.0 before Pattern was capable of doing so? Because at the time, Pattern is the little, poke around, do nothing, spren.
Just buzzes.
Yeah. And she's barely having conversations with Pattern at the time. And then she pulls a Shardblade to kill Tin. She also pulls a shard blade, and here's another part of it. She pulls a shard blade to carve out the stone in the Kaladin scene.
That's what I was thinking of when you mentioned which Radiant Shard Blade, by the way.
And it changes shape for her. It changes into like a little dagger so that she can carve a hole. So then it is that pattern because he's then alive at the time.
Yes.
But Pattern,
I would say a definitive yes. I think it is
but
still
if
yes.
you remember back in the scene, Pattern is busy creating an illusion to distract with Kaladin. Pattern is not with her in the scene if you go back and reread it. And she pulls
I
a
guess I
Shardblade
do need to
anyway.
reread it. I guess I'll need to reread it. But I thought so she did, in that case then she did not kill the Spren as a child.
That would be the insinuation, yes.
But then she would have 2 Spren.
But this correct, and then this Spren would not appear to be a Deadeye, and it does appear to be a Deadeye in Shadesmar.
Yes.
So
then it's like, when did it die? And I would guess with all this like formless nonsense or something. But could you bond 2 Spren then? That's pretty cool.
That's a great question. Can you bond 2 Spren?
I still think it's Pattern. Because that opens a large can of worms.
It does.
I would be down for dual wielding Spren shard blades, but maybe we'll find out if Maya's restoration
Also,
turns into like a thing,
yes.
and they bring back this cryptic Deadeye 2 for Shallan. know.
Yes, that also feeds into this of is the death of a Spren permanent?
Which we know
yes
it's
and
not.
no.
Usually.
Yeah, we haven't seen her eyes are still scratched out and things like that, right, Maya? Like she's not like quote alive again. But I mean she just spoke. So I mean there's a lot going on there and a lot to be had. So I think that they can
and
restore, but it's just gonna take time or
and then
something.
If you remember back in Words of Radiance as well, Kaladin almost kills Syl. And Kaladin says, I thought I killed you when she comes back. And Syl says, I was only as dead as your oaths, Kaladin.
Mm.
And so apply that to Shallan, because Shallan's oaths are crazy weird. Her oaths for Pattern are, I killed my father, I killed my mother. And that's her 2 oaths, her 2 truths that she speaks. But when she's bonding Pattern 1, she has yet to do either of those truths. So she then has to revive whatever those truths are as a kid. So there are so many applications in this one chapter of peeling back Shallan's storyline. Like what Pattern or what Shardblade is what is when is Shallan? It's a great question. I don't know. There's so many minutia of her timeline that gets so confusing now.
Mm-hmm. I will say it's difficult for me to track with the Lightweavers. Like I'm like, okay, so with our other Knights Radiant, yes, they go back on their oaths, they break their oaths, like they devolve, I guess, as a Radiant. That makes logical sense. This doesn't make sense to me. Because obviously the Spren like know what these truths are, and they know what they are deep down inside somewhere. And they say them, how do you go back on that? Do you stop believing that that's true? Or a lie? Or because they're called... Pattern always refers to them as lies, but they're truths. So it's just, it's all kinds of a mess. And
well, and it doesn't help too that on top of Lightweavers being confusing, which I'm still not quite sure if it's Lightweavers that are confusing or if it's just Shallan, because Shallan has this other factor coming into play here, where she has this this very selective memory.
Right.
She can basically choose to completely suppress memories or bring them back. And we already know that what you think of a Spren or what you expect it to be, it can become. And so you could almost run with that and get to some kind of place where Shallan can like flip on and off her oaths at will. That she can like remember where she was and, oh no, I've broken them. Or she can kind of suppress that and no, we're back to, pattern. It's almost like she's, I don't know, bouncing back and forth between different states of bond with her Spren because she can so completely just, step in and out of personalities.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to hear my newest, really hot, really crazy theory?
I would.
Oh dear.
Shallan has been to the Night Watcher. and received.
Suppress some memories.
Yes. So I was thinking about her memory while you're talking about this, and how she has like a perfect, like photographic,
Right.
perfect memory.
Yes.
But there's all this, and so we're like, okay, it's the question is like, okay, when? But her family's crazy, so I'm sure one of her parents or sibling or someone just took her to the Night Watcher as a child and was like, please get blessed or something, and some craziness unfolded. But maybe that's why we see an impeccable memory. Like, having a photographic memory is not normal. Like, that's like it's crazy to fathom, and to be able to do that like so well and so perfectly. But there's like the tainted side of it, of like suppression, and like almost not believing her own memories, And so that's my crazy hot new theory that I'm gonna try to cling on to here. So
I kind of like that, to be honest.
it'll be a book 5 reveal. It'll be like dun dun dun. I forget her parents' names. They had this child and they took her to the Night Watcher or something. That'd explain a lot of just weird things.
Ask for photographic memory, and then the Night Watcher's like, yes, but only one of your personas. I'm splitting your personas into like 4 now, and only one of them gets photographic memory. Dang it.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be crazy. All right, anything else?
I mean, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You can keep going if you want.
I don't need to. I was just thinking that would also explain some of the like why she has so many personas and so much, just so much stuff. It's like the blessing. You get photographic memory. The curse. You have a horrible family life and trauma and multiple personas, and it's not worth it for photographic memory, in my opinion. But
Something in this chapter, trying to get back on track here, that I don't want to skip over, that I think is actually really powerful. I didn't catch this on my first listen. I read this chapter, and before she goes to confront Kalak, or kill Kalak is her original plan, but before she does that, Pattern interrupts her and says, I've been talking to Wit, and Wit told me to tell you 2 things. We trust you, and we love you. And I think that is really, really powerful, that Wit went out of his way just to tell Shallan that in a time that he knew that she needed it, because of Pattern's reports to him that she's been sliding. Just tell her we trust her and that we love her, and that will be enough. And then it leads to that scene. So I think that's really cool.
So cool. I love that method of picking someone up, of acknowledging that they're broken and putting your faith in them anyway, and the power that can have for someone like Shallan, who's in a broken place. That was so cool. I agree. There was another really cool moment in this chapter that I don't want to miss, and that's Adolin at the beginning of this chapter, before she even leaves. She's full on formless at that point, and she's on the mission to kill Kalak. She's leaving, and Adolin says something which is going to come back up later.
Yep.
And that's his little metaphor that he spins into of, let's see, the version he uses is, who do you think is stronger? The man who has walked his entire life, or the man with no legs who has to pull himself along by his arms? And then I think is it Vale that brings this back up with Formless later in their discussion of where is strength? Is strength in the person who's always been strong, or is it in the person who's had to fight every day of their life to get through the hard stuff? and makes it. Who is stronger?
Yeah.
And your initial response to a lot of that might be, well, the person who, the Olympic athlete who achieves, greatness and is stronger than anyone else. Sure, they're stronger. But what I think this brings up is a suggestion that in a lot of ways, it's actually the person who's been weak their entire life, the person who has struggled and fought, just like Shallan does every day with her emotions, with her lies, with her trusting herself, with her personality that she's fighting with. I think pattern encourages her on this. Vale encourages her on this. You fight every day, and that makes you strong. That weakness is your strength. That is such an encouraging message there. That's phenomenal. And I love that it starts out with Adolin. It comes from Adolin at the beginning.
Yeah, I agree. What did you guys think of the? Well, I won't frame the question. What did you think of the line, "I'm your veil, Shallan"? Did you guys catch that?
I most definitely did. And it felt like kind of the closure of something we've kind of known all along. Ever since Vale showed up, we knew that whole mechanism there of the split personalities was a way for Shallan to shield herself.
Right.
It was, I need to be able to do this. I can't really do this, or I can't be vulnerable enough, or I can't be confident enough. So here's a persona, Vale, who's going to protect me and do this, deal with the hard stuff that I can't, sort of thing. But for this to kind of come full circle to Vale being able to say that, I was your Vale, I protected you, but then says, but you don't need that anymore.
Yeah.
You don't need that protection.
You are me just as much as I am me. Everything I can do, you do as well. So I'm no longer needed. I think that's a really cool line.
And that's the moment that makes me choke up a bit. And that we mentioned it before, that feels that there's a finality there.
Yeah.
That's like, I'm done. I've completed my purpose. You don't need me anymore.
I'm wondering if Vale is gone. And I'm also wondering if Radiant is gone. But it's this conversation is specifically between Vale and Shallan. So I'm wondering if all three of them are gone and it's just Shallan now, or if it's just Vale who's gone. I assume Formless is also gone. Formless was never quite there, and Vale calls her out on that, of saying, Formless isn't here yet, you just want to think she is. So don't do this or else she will be, is Vale's claim there. And so I don't know. Do you guys think Radiant is still here, and do you think Vale is still here?
I'm not quite sure. It feels like it could be that moment where they're gone. Shallan, and it even talks about that Formless is elements of all of them. Is this the process of kind of reforming into Shallan of the different elements that she had kind of split herself into? It feels like this could be it. But the fact that Radiant didn't really participate in this a whole lot makes me think that there's kind of an unfinished business there that still needs to be perhaps completed.
That's what I was thinking too. As we've talked about this, it feels like okay, yeah, you don't need me anymore. Like you've grown in this, so Vale kind of dissipates, and over time maybe the rest will dissipate as Shallan kind of comes back to her abilities, I guess, with these things, or growth with these things. Where at the end, I mean, I could totally see later on, Shallan thinking back, almost like dear friends, for Vale and Radiant, But yeah, I could honestly see, and I would like to see kind of a dissipation of these as Shallan comes back, I guess.
Right. Anything else for 93? All right. 94. I vividly remembered this scene from my first read because it is the scene that we've been waiting for what, 2 books now, when we knew that something special was happening between Adolin and Maya. We didn't quite know what it was, but something was happening there. And the Honor Spren pull Maya forward as the final witness, and they're just expecting to use her as an example and shout and yell at Adolin for how dare he be here while you enslave this Shardblade Spren, and you have no ground to stand on, etc., etc. And as they go forward, and the scene keeps going on and on and on, and there's multiple different angles that they attack Adolin, Maya gets more and more agitated until she makes eye contact with Adolin, and Adolin says, "Take my strength." And then Maya has a voice, and Maya calls that we chose, which, putting aside all of the future ramifications of that sentence, what did you guys think of this trial scene?
I think this was my favorite scene of our episode. I loved how it played out. So that's been my big question. As long as Adolin has been down here, and once he got into this hole, I will go on trial on behalf of all Knights Radiant. Like, okay, how are you gonna do that? And we see that here. And what I love most about this, so the spread have kind of set him up to fail. He's been brought in with all these witnesses to show that Radiants have killed Spren and how it is not sustainable or safe for them to bond with humans, with the Alethi or anyone. And then it wasn't really his words were very well put, and I loved it. I loved the dialogue. That was like my personal favorite like part, but it wasn't like the dialogue that made the biggest impact.
Yeah.
It was his care and his relations with Maya, his Shardblade, who is a Deadeye Spren, who he didn't even I don't think he ever had adoration for his Shardblade because like, oh, this is one day going to like, help me in a pinch, like this in a court sense. But it showed his genuine care for his Shardblade and for Spren, if you will. And how his like genuine care translated into Maya being able to speak, which is unheard of. And carried a lot of weight here. And I just thought that was a really cool culmination, because I was thinking back to, is it Words of Radiance, like before his duels, like talking to his Shardblade and
Yep.
things, and it was like a ritualistic thing for him. And I just was thinking about that the whole time, and how cool that is.
Yeah, that is one of those rereader views for you. If you go back and reread the Stormlight Archive, Adolin always talks to his Spren, even in the Way of Kings. He talks to his sword as if it's, part of his family or something, is a line in the Way of Kings. And when you go back and read that now, you're like, like that'll, yep, yeah, okay.
And the words that come out of Maya's mouth when she does speak, oh man, just when we thought we understood what had happened, and we're gonna flip things on its head again.
Yep.
With 2 words, 2 simple words, we chose. And I related to the chaos in the scene with all the Spren like going crazy, because that's kind of what my head was doing in that moment, was like, wait, but if okay. That kind of thought going on as we realized that the Recreance was not what we thought it was. And I was glad that Adolin and Blended, I think, kind of had a chance to dissect it a bit afterward.
Yep.
Because the implications of this are pretty big.
Right.
I was still a little bit torn, though. I'm still not quite sure this is everything.
Right. Well, and that's
We
what
get
Blended says was,
Yeah.
well, now we have more questions, not fewer. Like,
I may have fewer than I did before, because this is very helpful, right? This explains quite a bit. We were searching pretty hard for the why would the Radiants kill hundreds of Spren, who they are bonded to as, best friend type thing.
yeah.
What would be so terrible that they would all kill their best friends for that? Well, we realized that, one, the Spren had a say in it. It was not a betrayal.
Yep.
It was a active decision by hundreds of Radiant Spren pairs. And it's not entirely clear, but it seems like from what we were able to get out of Maya here that they didn't know necessarily that they were going to die.
Right.
It was a, hey, we need to break this, but we're not quite sure what's going to happen. I'm sure it's going to be unpleasant, but we need to do it. The question I'm left with is still kind of that, well, but what is the reason for all this still?
Right.
And we've gotten hints at it, and we think our latest theory, at least my latest theory, was the whole Parshman event, where we know that they captured Ba-Ado Mishram,
Yep.
the Unmade, and that act imprisoned the singers within their own minds, creating Parshman.
Right.
So kind of based on that, the theory we've kind of settled on for now is that the Radiants saw that happen, realized that they had crippled an entire race of beings, and were like, oh, that was terrible. We need to make sure that never happens again, so we're going to break our bonds.
Right.
But I don't know. I just have this kind of itching feeling that that's not the whole story, that there's something else there, and I don't know what.
And exploring that idea, if that is really the reason, a little bit more, I assume what happened with Ba-Ado Mishram is this, and I've waited a long time to say this, by the way. What I assume that happened with Ba-Ado Mishram is this, is that they found out that fused were tied to a specific unmade, and them being able to come back to Roshar was bound to Ba-Ado Mishram, because she is the unmade of, like, either cognitive shadows or Everstorm Spren or something in that classification. So they figured out, oh, we can imprison Ba-Ado Mishram and stop the fused from coming back. And that's how the final desolation happened. And it was the same thing that had been happening, except this time Ba-Ado Mishram was no longer on Roshar. But in doing that, the byproduct of stopping the fused from coming back was we have stopped all Spren from bonding in gem hearts. Is the bridge I'm willing to jump there. So the byproduct of the fuse never being able to return is the entire singer race now no longer has forms to adopt, and they are stuck in what they call dull form of Sprenless form.
Right.
So, and that's what they finally were saying, like, this is no longer acceptable. But I don't know if I'm completely sold on that, because like we've said, like we've explored before, the Recreance specifically happens after the final desolation, and who are the Knights Radiant fighting exactly? Well, we've gotten a few hints of, well, are the Unmade, like the Unmade tried to start the fight before Odium came back, and maybe that's who they were fighting, or maybe they were fighting like the Listeners is a possible outcome, and the Listeners made them change their perspective on there are still, there's I don't know. There's several conclusions that you have to jump that I'm not comfortable jumping. So, or that could not even be the reason. So,
And I think I'm starting to build up enough scar tissue as well at this point of thinking I have it figured out, only for it to get turned on its head later.
right.
That I'm kind of now in the point of like, well, okay, but I'm sure another twist is coming. Like that's where I'm at now.
Yeah. Anything else for the, I guess, the whole plot line, because we don't hear from them till the end of part 4. So, anything else for Adolin and Shallan?
Just a brief mention of, in addition to saying we chose, Maya also screams out a phrase that I loved for its relevance to our major plot arc in Oathbringer.
Yeah.
Maya says, "You cannot have my sacrifice," which was fantastic because that dives into the whole, I chose this, I decided to sacrifice myself. You cannot take that away from me and blame them for it.
Right.
And I love the parallels between that and to Dalinar's choice in front of Odium of you cannot have my pain. And I thought the similarity that there's was very, very obvious and very powerful, and I'm sure intentional.
Very well earned too. Like, it doesn't seem too cheap to me. I really enjoyed it.
Yep. That was it. That was my last thing from 94.
All right. So our last flashback chapter of part 4 is a fairly quick chapter, and it's Venli running in circles at the end of Words of Radiance. Has everybody out there singing for to summon the Everstorm, and she's really thinking to herself, what have I done? Like, this is the end of the world. Why am I here to witness it? How did I get here? Is what she keeps asking herself. And there isn't that much more to this scene besides this is pretty distraught Venli at the time. She sees Eshonai fighting Adolin, falls into the chasm, and she describes herself as pretty emotionless for it. When we find Eshonai at the bottom of the chasm in Oathbringer, Venli does have an emotional reaction to it at that point. But here, watching her fall into a chasm in Shardplate, she's not sure if she's dead, so that could be a little bit of it. But she even questions herself, why do I not have a emotional reaction to that event? I just watched Eshonai fall 200 feet, probably likely to her death. Why do I not care?
It's really curious to me. I don't know what to make of that exactly. Like, yeah, I expect an emotional thing. I mean, I feel like our Parshendi emotions have been different. Like, it is different from our Alethi characters and our human side. So in my head, I kind of chalked it up to that. Like, maybe it's like different, like not as much like remorse in retrospect for things like that. But that's me being a little too logical, like worldly logical. I think there's probably some answer for something that's going on with Venli. Maybe it's just like conflicting things internally. I mean, she has a void spren and a radiant spren, so I think that could definitely play into this.
Yeah. She doesn't.
But yeah, I don't know what to make of it past that.
She doesn't have her Radiant Spren yet at that point, but I do think it's related to. I think it's related to Odium's presence at the time, because Odium's whole thing is surrender your emotion to me, and she's just summoned the Everstorm. So I feel like it's tied to that, because she mentioned something about she feels a presence that's feasting on the like the emotion and feasting on the passion that is on, which could be the thrill, but it also could be odium. So I'm not because the thrill is there before the Everstorm. Odium shows up with the Everstorm, so I don't know which one you could tie that to. You could make an argument for either one, but I would chalk it up to she's just summoned the Everstorm. She doesn't want to face the implications of that. She surrenders her pain to odium, like we've seen Moash do.
I picked up on this intense conflict in Venli where she still has the desires and urges that her Voidspren has kind of fed into her. This, I deserve this. Look how powerful I am. I just made this happen. This is my storm. I should revel in it. But then, like the very next moment, she's, cowering back behind a rock in fear of, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And she's like constantly flip flopping between the two of these of, haha, I just tricked that, human into not killing me. I'm the most important singer here. He should have killed me. To, like you were talking about, the storm of, feeling this presence and just this maybe shame of what have I done? It's like she feels the arrogant emotions, but then immediately feels guilty for that right after.
Right. The next chapter is a present day Venli chapter. Venli has just received the info from Raboniel that says there's a group of listeners that survived the Everstorm and the High Storm, and they are still living near the Shattered Plains or to the east of the Shattered Plains ish. And she goes to, or Relaine finds her, I should say. She doesn't go to Relaine. Relaine finds her, and Venli. We finally get Venli tells Relaine of everything that we've been learning with the flashback chapters of, I had a Voidspren before everyone else did. I was behind summoning the Everstorm. I wanted to kill these listeners that got away because they wouldn't take on Stormform. She confesses that all of that to Relaine, and Relaine, rightfully so, says, "Oh, well, I thought I was a traitor when I was having a soft spot for Bridge 4. I love the term, the phrase he uses. I didn't have the first notes of what it meant to be a traitor," is what he says at the end of the chapter, which I think is really cool in world use of, I had no idea. I didn't have the first notes. Anyway. So Venli has finally revealed everything that she's done to someone, and it's Relaine. And I don't think she's revealed Timber to anyone yet, but she has revealed that she was behind the summoning of the Everstorm. So
I liked Relaine's comment in here, though, or the cautionary comment of, you're playing into her hands, her being Raboniel.
right.
Because we've seen Raboniel done this. We've seen Raboniel do this before, where she'll feed somebody, usually Navani, a thread, let her pull on it, and then you realize at the end of the thread is exactly what Raboniel wanted you to do.
Right.
And this feels exactly like that again, of she has told Venli, hey, you're free to go. Oh, and by the way, your people were just spotted right here. All of that, based on what we know of Raboniel, just screams to me, she's manipulating you. She wants you to do this. And Relaine points it right out. And Venli knows it, but wants to do it anyway.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm very worried there. I don't know what to be worried necessarily of, because it seems like Raboniel has bigger fish to fry. But I've learned enough now, especially given the next chapter, that Raboniel always has a hidden motive.
Yes. The next chapter, chapter 97, it's the last chapter of part 4, kind of whiplashes in the middle of the chapter. Navani is we finally get the Navani did it. She finally did it. She found what she's been looking for years, and well, she didn't know she was looking for it for years, I guess. But she finally finds anti-void light, and then Raboniel comes in and discovers it with her, and then just stabs her daughter in the chest, and the whole chapter just whiplashes like immediately. Of this is an emotional chapter, by the way. Like this is not a science chapter. This is also an emotional chapter. What do you guys think?
I wasn't ready for that whiplash moment, that's for sure. Because I was so, just like you said, I was so focused in on the science-y part of it and figuring out, okay, so she did exactly this, and then that worked, and okay, and then the vacuum chamber, and all right, bingo. And then, whoa, okay, somebody's dead now. Got it. Okay. And it's just screamed Raboniel all over it. Like, this is Raboniel in a nutshell. She's incredibly logical. She's incredibly smart and scientific, but she's also manipulative and ruthless all at the same time. And she has already pre-planned this moment hundreds of years ago, probably. She's seen her daughter go through this misery, and she has planned out, I'm going to discover this one day, and as soon as I do, I'm going to use it to kill her, to free her from this pain. And she doesn't hesitate for a moment. As soon as she has it, she whips out the dagger and she stabs her. Just, oh man, I wasn't ready for it, but Raboniel clearly was.
Right.
That's true. I agree with everything. I don't know if I have much more to add on top of that. I like the perspective of Raboniel's probably thought about this for a long time. And I think that's the important thing to note there. One thing I want to briefly touch on, which we won't talk too long on, because we've talked about this before, the whole music theory conversations.
Yeah.
Because so it talks about, and this was my biggest question, it talks about making the opposite of a tone, or like the antithesis of a tone.
Yeah.
And this always gets me because, and Brandon Sanderson describes this. He had a lot of describing with this. I thought it was almost funny how much, because it talks about how, you know, a sound is a wavelength. It's it's a wavelength on a graph. And so if you make the opposite of it, for every peak, there's a trough on the opposite, and vice versa. For every trough, there's a peak on the opposite. But if you hear the opposite of it, where there's a trough and a peak, like, it's just gonna, if you play that, like, it's just gonna sound the same.
Right.
You're hearing it at a fraction of a nanosecond's like difference, you
Right.
know. And so, like, it's not gonna make a difference in your ear just because it's the quote opposite of it. Like, it's the opposite is still the same, essentially, just barely moved, you know.
Right.
And so, like, logically, Elliot mentioned this earlier of it feels like Brandon Sanderson gave a lot of descriptions and then almost left me wanting for more a little bit on, like, it still doesn't quite add up. He explained all of that, and then it was like, and then I found the real anti thing, that the anti sound to make anti void light. And at first I was like, man, that I kind of wanted a little something more. I was left wanting. But I thought about it, and I was like, well, we'd be asking Brandon Sanderson to, like, come up with the actual, like, anti to sound, and I don't know how practical that is.
Right.
And so I didn't think too much about it, honestly. Like, I kind of just let things go with that, but it was still neat to kind of hear that. And I like how Brandon Sanderson gets real in depth with everything he uses, like with literal, like, sound waves and the physics of that, I guess. And you talked about it in a previous book, I think, with G-Force, and how he talked to pilots or things like that, and just a lot of stuff like that. I'm sure he talked to musicians or did some research on music theory for this, you know.
Right.
But that was one thing I wanted to touch on briefly about this anti-void light.
I loved that explanation and that breakdown as well, where he really got in the weeds of the math behind the music, which was super cool. And I followed as far as everything you explained there of, the peaks and troughs of your sound wave, your sine wave that goes, and your opposite is the same thing. It's just kind of shifted. And then he gets into this. Navani finds the actual opposite by hearing the same tone, but then somehow being able to discern a difference. And she's able to kind of tune her ear into a difference. And then she's able to shape her plate that she's working with to be able to create this tone that's still somehow the same tone, but it's somehow different.
Yeah.
And that was where I kind of got stuck is there a actual real world scientific explanation for what she's doing here, or are we really delving into like the magic here? Are we breaking physics a little bit here with the magic? And I think it's that latter, because a certain word shows up again here,
Yep.
a certain capitalized word, and that's intent.
Yep.
Navani talks about how she realizes that as she's doing this, she has to have intent in what she's doing to be able to hear this special anti-tone. And so I'm wondering if we're starting to get into the fi of the sci-fi, that the fiction side of this, of we're going to take soundwave physics and now we're going to tweak it. Now we're going to show how on Roshar it's different, and how the singers, Raboniel specifically, hear things differently than a human does, because the same tone that a human ear hears the same, the singer hears differently. And Navani is somehow able to kind of tap into that singer ability with her intent somehow.
Yeah. So I was going to mention that unless you didn't. Yeah, I'm with you on everything you guys just said. It's the same wavelength except shifted over however many, seconds or whatever. And the way that he explains this away is intent, capital I, intent. And do you guys remember our epigraphs from Rhythm of War? From part 3, the previous part, our epigraphs were from Rhythm of War, and it took us until the end of that part to find out what Rhythm of War was. Do you guys know what Rhythm of War is?
It is a book written by Navani.
Yes, it's her notebook.
Mm-hmm.
And there's notes in it by Raboniel and Navani. Specifically in this chapter, Navani rescues the book and walks out of the room because she knows that what Raboniel's about to try, and she knows the outcome of it. So she rescues the book, walks out of the room, explosion, walks back in, and the last excerpt from the last epigraph we get in part 3 is this. This is written in by Navani's hand or Raboniel's hand, in Rhythm of War, and it's this: intent matters. Intent is king. You cannot do what I attempt by accident. You must mean it. This seems a much greater law than we've ever before understood. That's the final epigraph of part 3. Incidentally, I know people have been waiting. We'll be going over epigraphs for part 4 next week, since this episode is going long. But so the way that Brandon Sanderson is explaining this, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but this is how I'm interpreting it. The cognitive realm is influencing this. I am going to try to create this opposite tone, and so the spren of this plate is going to form itself to create what I'm trying to intend it to. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
I think so.
That's the best definition I can give you, is that the magic is I am trying to create this, therefore the magic will use my mind and adopt to that. I'm trying to create a lashing upwards. I have an intent of creating a lashing upwards. It's going to create a lashing upwards. I'm trying to create an opposite void light pitch. It will create an opposite void light pitch. I don't know if that helps.
Bringing in
the
spren of the plate actually helps me with a bit of this, because I was a little confused there. I follow the logic there of Navani can tune into this tone with her intent, or she can help create this with the magical intent that the cognitive realm kind of reflects, or whatever, however that works. Where it kind of lost me was Raboniel walks into the room, and Raboniel grabs the plate that Navani just made, slaps it on the table, plays the note, and it's the anti-note. Like, where was the intent there? Clearly, Raboniel, does not have that, because that's the missing piece that she doesn't have.
Right.
So clearly, Navaniel. Wow, I cannot say names tonight. Mashing everything together.
That's the ship of both of them, Raboniel and Navaniel.
Apparently, Navani has apparently imbued the plate with the new
with intent
tone.
Yeah,
right. The intent has been done, and now the plate plays the new tone. And so bringing in, perhaps the spren of the plate, or the plate itself, somehow that ability has been transferred to it, so that anyone can now pick up the plate and play the new tone. But she had to create it with intent.
Right.
Okay. So I think that helps me.
Okay. Yeah. Before, when I read Rhythm of War for the first time and this whole thing came up, I was like, I will worry about that later. I do not understand. So you're not alone here if it doesn't quite click for me on first read. And capital I intent is certainly certainly a topic that Brandon Sanderson has been asked multiple times. What else in this chapter?
Two quick science-y shout-outs. The first one, I thought Navani was incredibly clever using a vacuum tube to do this part of the experiment, because she realizes that if I put void light in a vacuum, it can't hear sound.
Yeah.
Because in a vacuum, there's no particles to transfer that sound across. And so she's able to isolate it and then expose it to her new tone at exactly the moment that she wants to. So that was very clever. The second one was, we finally got an in-text, direct and clear explanation of what an axon is, or an axis in plural.
Yeah.
I remember this getting dropped by like Yasna
and Oathbringer.
Like middle of Oathbringer, and I like full stopped on that sentence, like, what the heck was that? And Trevor, I think you did us a favor and you just explained to us what it was in that moment, because it wasn't super important. But when I read this, and finally Raboniel explains what an axon is to Navani, I was just thinking back of, man, if I didn't have you to explain that to me, I would have had to wait an entire, book and a quarter to finally get this explanation of what Yasna mentions, 1,000 pages ago.
Yeah. So what is the in book definition?
I was wondering too. I missed this.
I guess we should explain that. The explanation, the answer that we finally get here is that an axon is basically just an in-universe reference to like an atom. It's the smallest you can split something down to. It's the indivisible building block of matter. And that the description, the discussion that they get into here is actually even on the polarity of these axes, and get really into the science of, okay, when you're using these tones and affecting things, what are you doing to the individual axes that are involved in this? Like, oh man, we're getting like molecular science now
Yeah.
in our story here. This was serious.
Anything else?
I don't think so. It was a big chapter. There was a lot to process in there.
Yeah. The very end, like the last 2 paragraphs of the chapter, is the war effort part of Raboniel finally revealed, of why are we actually here? Like, besides Raboniel's personal vendetta of releasing my daughter from eternal craziness, the war effort version is, we have found a weapon to use against cognitive investiture, and so this anti-void light that we have found expels void light from the room when they use it. And I have this mental image. I know this is not quite canonically how it happens in the book, but if this were ever on a visual adaptation, I have a mental image of Raboniel walking over to the table, playing this anti-void light plate, and all of the spheres that are lighting the room are void light spheres, right? Because Stormlight, well, that's not necessarily, but assume that all of the lights in the room are void light spheres. She goes over and plays this plate, and all of the light rushes out of the room, and it's pitch black. The screen is pitch black. And then the camera is, just track with me here for a second. The camera is from Navani's point of view, and Raboniel has her back to Navani, plays the plate, and then all the screen goes black, and all the void light rushes out of the room. And then Raboniel turns and looks at Navani with the realization of what just happened, and all you see are her 2 glowing red eyes, because it's the only void light left in the room. You see her 2 glowing red eyes as the void light slowly creeps back in from the hallway. And then you get the realization on Raboniel's face of what she just witnessed. That's how I imagine this visual adaptation to go. So
that would be super cool.
We have a weapon against investiture. Does it expel it? Does it destroy it when it's under pressure? Is a question we have here, because when it isn't, so as far as the mechanics go, it's basically just a magnet, a pushing away magnet. And when I play this tone, it pushes void light away. But when the void light is under pressure and can't go anywhere, it causes a heat and pressure explosion. So does that destroy the investiture, or does that just discharge it, or whatever? So now we have a mechanic to expel void light, and Raboniel says, "Great, now it's time to do Stormlight." Is how the chapter ends, and that is the reason why she has kept all of her radiance alive in the tower. That's why she's allowed them to go through so much effort to keep them alive and cared for, so that she has live patients to test anti-Stormlight on once she creates the proper plate. So it could get quite dark quite fast here in the tower.
Yeah,
that's right. Whenever I
Go
thought
ahead,
this
Paul.
was funny because it was like, all right, we did it. We found anti-void light. Then in my mind, it's like it pauses for a second, and then she's like, now do Stormlight. And
Right.
it's like, I don't want to.
Right, exactly.
I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, I'm super worried about our radiance at this point. Like, I imagine when we pick up the storyline again, Raboniel could have the power to just go into that room where they're all in a coma and just one at a time stab them with these special knives and just kill all of the humans and also kill the spren.
Correct.
Therewith is
She says
the implication there.
It specifically attacks their spren and kills their spren. Because she equates radiance and fused as the same, where you kill a Radiant and it's reincarnate. The Sprennan just comes back with a new Radiant. You kill a Fuse, the Fuse just comes back with a new body. Like to her, that's a 1-to-1 match. But now we can kill both of them with this power. So that is where we're left at the end of part 4. Anything else for the chapter?
Just a quick mention of the irony there when you think about our Adolin storyline. Adolin has just at least partially successfully convinced the Honor Spren that it's not quite as dangerous as they thought to bond with Radiance.
Yes, exactly.
And yet now, they don't know this, but we do. Raboniel now just discovered a power to destroy Spren, perhaps permanently, whereas Adolin just kind of convinced them that, yeah, that doesn't actually normally happen. And so, yeah, a little bit ironic there.
Which leads me to the question, do you stab the Radiant or do you stab the Spren with the dagger? Second question, where's Syl? We left Syl in the atrium, remember? She got separated from Kaladin with the well cover, and then Kaladin had to go so far away that they lost their bond. They lost their connection, at least temporarily, and Kaladin can't hear Syl. So is Syl captured?
That's really bad if that's true.
Yeah.
Like, Syl is about to be
Test subject 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea where she is. I really, really hope she's not in a lab in Raboniel's back room.
Right. All right. We will sum up part 4 next week to trim down this episode. We'll also do epigraphs of part 4 next week, and we will be entering part 5 as well. So excited for that. Do you guys have anything closing thoughts for this episode, Paul or Eliot?
A lot to look forward to. I'm excited for interludes. Our last interludes of this book. Or for a while, really.
For a long time.
Last interludes for a long time. But I'm excited for them, so.
Same. I'm very excited for where we're headed here in the wrap-up of this book.
Sounds good. Let's reconvene next week. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Eliot.
See ya.
Bye.